Hi boys and girls, happy Wednesday. Today we are going over chapters 11 and 12 of Unit 11, the Civil War. Our reminders before we start: remember to check any active assessments on Edulastic. Don't forget to work on iReady in math and reading. And don't forget to complete math and ELA videos. And also don't forget that we are monitoring Go Guardian throughout the week. Please make sure you're using your Chromebook as you would at school. Our agenda: I'm going to state the objective, what you're expected to learn from Chapter 11. I'm going to read the Chapter 11 big question, then I'll read the chapter to you, and then you're going to read Chapter 12 on your own with the electronic reader attached to this video. And then I'm going to go over expectations for independent work, and then more reminders and our goodbyes for the day. So today you're going to learn about the Winfield-Scott strategy and how McClellan's cautious behavior hurt the Union. And so our two objectives will be: I can explain Winfield-Scott's strategy for winning the war, that's chapter 11, and I can explain how McClellan's excessive caution undermined the Union strategy. So chapter 11's big question is, what was General Winfield-Scott's plan to win the war and how successful was it? Chapter 11, developing a strategy. The Scott plan. General Winfield Scott had known a long time that this war would not be ended with one quick, decisive battle. The first battle of Bull Run proved him right. Scott knew war. He had fought in every American war since the War of 1812. In the war with Mexico, it was Scott who led the American troops in triumph into Mexico City. After an unsuccessful run for presidency in 1852, Scott returned to his duties as commanding general of all American forces. A native Virginian who opposed slavery, Scott remained with the Union. This was unlike some of his fellow Virginians, such as Lee, who sided with the Confederacy. At age 75, General Scott could no longer command troops in the field. However, he could still use his experience to develop a winning strategy for the war. He got right to work after Fort Sumter fell. Scott explained his plan to President Lincoln. The Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River divided the Confederacy into three nearly equal parts. The Confederacy could be weakened by isolating each of those parts. The first step would be to gain control of the Mississippi River and the three Confederate states on the western side of the river: Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. This action would cut off those states from the rest of the Confederacy. They would be knocked out of the war. At the same time, the Navy would be used to set up a naval blockade. A blockade would prevent ships from entering or leaving the Confederacy ports on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast. The Confederacy would be unable to sell cotton to Europe or to buy supplies needed. So here's kind of the map that shows Scott's plan to win the war. Here you can see that their plan is to take control of that river, and you can see the blockades that are surrounding that border of those southern states. So there, I'm trying to highlight in yellow the blockades that they have. So this means that the Southerners could not leave, or they couldn't ship goods, they couldn't get supplies due to this blockade. And these states over here were, these states on the other side of the river were completely cut off from the rest of the Confederacy. Weaker the Union would press its advantage in manpower and supplies. By then, the Union large armies would be experienced in battle. They would be ready to advance from the north and from the west, cutting the Confederacy into smaller parts and defeating them. President Lincoln came to recognize that Scott's strategy was a sound one. Others, however, criticized it for being too slow and too timid. They ridiculed Scott's plan, calling it the anaconda strategy. An anaconda is a long snake that kills by wrapping itself around its prey and slowly crushing it. The critics called for a bold plan that would end the war in months, not years. Even President Lincoln worried that the nation might grow weary of a long war. Lincoln supported an early battle to settle the issue. But Scott knew that the Confederate armies were not going to crumble after a few battles. They had too many fine leaders and too many brave men. The Union could win, but only after a long, hard fight. The first battle of Bull Run proved him right. The day after Fort Sumter surrendered, President Lincoln declared a naval blockade. However, in the early years of the war, the blockade was not effective. No ship can be everywhere at once, and the Union had only 42 ships to patrol the shoreline of 3,500 miles and 189 ports. During 1861, 9 out of every 10 ships that tried to run the blockade made it safely. By the start of 1862, northern shipyards began to produce large numbers of warships, and the Union's Navy was more successful. By the end of the war, the Union Navy numbered 700 vessels, and the blockade was far more effective. The Virginia and the Monitor. For a short time in early 1862, it looked like the South might have a weapon that could shatter the Union blockade. Back at the start of the war, the U.S. Navy had to leave its base in Norfolk, Virginia, because Confederate forces were closing in. As the Union warships hurried out of the port, one of them, the Merrimac, caught fire and sank in shallow waters. Later, the Confederate raised the ship, cut off its burned top, and covered its sides with a double layer of 2-inch thick iron plates. Each side had holes for 5 large naval guns. On its bow, the front of the ship, was a 1,500-pound iron battering ram. All this work took many months, but on March 8, 1862, the ironclad ship, now renamed the Virginia, steamed out of Norfolk's harbor and took on 2 large Union warships. Cannonballs simply bounced off the Virginia's slanted sides and fell harmlessly into the water. The Virginia sank both Union ships and scattered several others before anchoring it for the night. The Union Navy, however, had been building its own ironclad ship called the Monitor. The next day, as the Virginia steamed out to destroy more Union ships, the Monitor was waiting for it. For 4 hours, the battle raged as hundreds watched from the shore. Although each side claimed victory, neither ship could sink the other. For the next few months, though, fearful of the Virginia, Union ships steered clear of the waters off Norfolk. Then, in May, as Union troops advanced on Norfolk, it was the Confederacy's turn to abandon the port. Rather than allow the Virginia to fall into the Union's hands, Confederate soldiers destroyed the ship. The Confederacy unsuccessfully tried to buy another ironclad warship from the European countries. Without such ships, the Confederacy had no chance of breaking through the Union's blockade. Mississippi River ports. In 1862, Union warships commanded by Captain David Farragut made a bold move to carry out the second part of Scott's strategy. Their goal was to cut off Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana from the rest of the Confederacy. Farragut was a commander of a fleet of 23 warships blocking the mouth of the Mississippi River. New Orleans, by far the Confederacy's biggest port, was just a short way upriver. Farragut believed that he could take the enemy by surprise. He could capture the city. After his ships bombarded the Confederate forts near the mouth of the river for 5 days, Farragut ordered his fleet upstream. Despite heavy fire, he captured New Orleans. Confederate ships could still sail down the Mississippi River, but they could no longer use the port at its mouth to unload goods, and they could not get to an open sea. Meanwhile, Union armies, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, fought fierce battles in the South. By the end of 1862, Grant had won several victories, but at Shiloh, near the Mississippi border, a Confederate army caught Grant by surprise. The resulting battle lasted for 2 days. Both sides suffered a heavy loss of life. In the end, however, Grant drove the Confederate troops back. So by the end of 1862, this is how matters stood in the West. Union forces had won control of most of the Mississippi River. Confederate troops, though, still had several important ports, including Vicksburg and Mississippi. This allowed the states of Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana to continue helping the Confederacy by sending men and supplies across the Great River. Until Union forces could take those river ports, the Anaconda would not be able to tighten its grip on the South. So next, your job is to read Chapter 12, which is the War in the East and Richmond. And your big question there is, what prompted Lincoln to remove General McClellan from command? And today's independent work is called A Soldier's Thoughts. So you're going to read the passage to get an idea of how soldiers felt when they were actually in battle. Then you're going to answer the questions that follow. Make sure to read the passage very carefully and to use complete sentences when answering the questions. All right, scholars, don't forget to complete any active assessments on Edulastic. Don't forget about iReady Math and Reading. Don't forget to complete math and ELA assignments and watch their videos. Don't forget we're monitoring GoGuardian throughout the week, so please make sure you're using your Chromebook as you would at school. All right, scholars, have a wonderful day.